Welcome back, everyone, to taking a look at random Victoria free things. Now, I have not been actually looking at the developer diaries one by one since, May or whatever. So I haven't actually done anything when it comes to Victoria free, but that's because I didn't want to basically have to make a video for every single dev diary because one, I'm fairly certain for, one reason or another, there probably would be weeks where I wouldn't be able to actually make the damn video covering a dev diary. And secondly, I really don't want there to be a bunch of like 10-minute videos or whatever about these dev diaries because they're fairly short. Like, as you can see, it's like a few sentences for each dev diary. So I just thought that it would be maybe better to group them up together. And yeah. So at this point, they've released 10 of them. The last one is the 10th one, so might as well actually get on with it. Now, first one was Pops. Second one was Capacities. Number 3 was Buildings. Number 4 is Goods. Number 5 is Production Methods. Number 6 is Interest Groups. Number 7 is Laws. Number 8 is Institutions. And number 9 is National Markets. And the number 10, as I said, is Infrastructure. So that's basically the whole gist of it. They're going over the basic mechanics of the game and just introducing what they want to do when it comes to them. Now, the pops in Victoria 3 are going to be very similar to the pops in Victoria 2 with a few differences. And I think that that's for the best because you don't want the pop system. You don't want to make it too complex, but you also don't want to dumb it down too much for a game like a Victoria 2. You don't want it to be as sort of simple as in Stellaris, because obviously Stellaris is a simulation at a much grander scale, so yeah, they need to be kind of at least as complex as Victoria 2, and they've actually added a bit of complexity to it, so I'm pretty happy about what they're doing, but let's go over it. So basically, you're in charge of the country, but you're not in charge of the pops, and you cannot manipulate directly. So just like in Victoria 2. Yet everything you do to the country affects them, and they will in turn react to what they perceive to be their own best interest. Of course, this is the reason why Victoria is, in general, such a unique game. A large part of your game will consist of trying to sate your population's appetites for material goods or political reform. The most important, and pops, of course, have a lot of characteristics. The most important aspects is their professions, which reflects the type of jobs it carries out and the buildings in which they work. A profession determines its social class and can affect its wages, political strength, and other professions it might qualify for, and what political interest groups it is prone to supporting. So basically, the whole idea is much like in Vicky 2, where you have your capitalists, your aristocrats, your officers, your craftsmen, your factory workers. Basically, that determines the social standing and a lot of other characteristics about the pop. And obviously, then indirectly determines their income as well, because obviously different professions are going to have different income levels. So some of the pop professions you will encounter in Victoria 3 are aristocrats, just like in Victoria 2, capitalists, which I'm guessing are going to be the same, bureaucrats, which I think are also going to be the same, except for one different thing, because you're going to need to build buildings for them, while in Victoria 2, you only need to pay them. Officers, shopkeepers, which are like artisans, I believe, mechanists or machinists, which I think are basically factory workers. Laborers, I'm not sure if these are also factory workers or only miners, like in Victoria 2, laborers. And the peasants. Investing in industries that provide job opportunities for the kind of professions you want to encourage in your country is key to the society building gameplay of Victoria 3. So they have a nice little representation of what a pop might look like. This is a Turkish aristocrat, or supposed Ottoman aristocrat. You can see up here they have the state in which it resides, the pop resides. You have the culture, of course, religion, which hopefully is going to have a little bit of a quality of life sort of improvement from Victoria 2, because in Victoria 2 religion was a thing, but it wasn't really something that you really interacted with much. You have, of course, your literacy, discrimination, which I suppose would be basically like primary and accepted pops of Victoria 2. As you can see, it appears like it is first class citizenship, as you know, you'd expect from the Ottoman Empire, being Turkish aristocrats, radicals, and loyalists. So I'm guessing this basically means like which members of sort of extreme political factions, or how many members of an extreme political faction are in this pop. Currently 0 for both. The interest group, which is the sort of wider political alignment, and there is the interest group, Dev Diaries, later down the line, so I will not really look at it right now. You have your political strength, which again is going to play into the interest groups and the reforms mechanics. The net income and the total, so that's the net income. Actually, is it recording my, yes, it is recording my glorious cursor. So the net income over here, which goes into the wealth. So obviously, much like in Victoria 2, pops are going to have wealth that basically determines whether or not they can secure luxury goods, and you know, that's what they want to do, and then reinvest into their own little business area or whatever, slash being able to promote to a higher class pop. Of course, this is an aristocrat, so it's not going to happen. And then, of course, you have your population. I wonder if this is like in Vicky 2, a sort of representative number, because in Vicky 2, every single pop is representing 3 or 4. I don't remember exactly which one. 3 or 4 people. So I wonder if this 8,000 people is, this entire pop has 8,000 like actual human beings, or if it is 8,000 breadwinners or whatever, because that's the whole logic of the each pop having 4 people in it. It's like the breadwinner plus some people who aren't. I guess the family unit or whatever. And then you have the workforce within the pop, which I suppose would like tell me that this is like the total population. And then the dependents, which is a new mechanic, and that's basically the population that is directly dependent on this pop in order to, in order for, you know, for them to have their social standing, right? So I'm guessing it would be like their peasants, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it's their servants. Maybe it's their, yeah, it's their bureaucrats or something. And you get a nice little breakdown of what they support in terms of interest groups, so the local governors or whatever, and the total political strength of this pop in the country. And you also get a nice little explanation of what these aristocrats are. They own farms and plantations. They contribute some of their profits to the investment pool. And only pops of adequate wealth can become aristocrats. Potential increases with greater wealth and to a lesser degree literacy. Yeah. Now it also says pops whose culture faces discrimination take a much longer time, which is I think a pretty like dumb thing, because it says take a much longer time, but actually like the aristocracy, unless you're like looking at very, very modern versions of landed aristocracy, where in countries that basically have already a sort of national nation state type of setting, you didn't really have like racial discrimination, like whatever. Yeah, you had a bunch of like German aristocrats in France. You had fucking what, like Polish aristocrats in Germany and all that. So and a bunch of like different types of aristocrats in the Austrian Empire. I don't know, whatever. The people that make up a pop are distinguished into the workforce and dependents. That's, as I said earlier. So the members of the workforce keep the buildings and game operational and collect a wage for them in return. Those who cannot or aren't permitted to be officially employed are considered dependents. Oh, okay, so that's like, okay. So dependents plus workforce equals population. They only collect a small income from odd jobs and government programs. yeah, basically what you'd expect. What you'd expect. And yeah, I don't disagree with anything that is in here. I don't really particularly think they've done anything too bold with the pops, because and that's good, because they didn't need to do anything too bold with the pops, because otherwise it's going to be insane. Like, there is a very, very high chance that getting the pops wrong means that the whole game is wrong. And so as long as the pops are sort of straying not too far from the hen house, that's good. Anyway, capacities. Capacities are basically the kind of mana-ish type of resource that they've added. So, capacities is 3 of the 4 main currencies of the game, and the last one is money. So, of course, money is money, but the 3 different capacities are the quote-unquote mana. Now, they say that there is no mana, but capacities kind of is mana, but it's mana that's sort of produced in an interesting way, because it's produced by your population. And so it makes sense. It's kind of like the industrial score in Victoria 2, and I'll explain why. So basically, the resources in Victoria 3 arise and are spent in clearly defined ways and part of the simulation, not from an overly abstract concept or a vague idea. Now, I'm not sure that's quite the definition of mana I would use, but it is definitely what the capacities are. I like the mechanic as it is set up, and I'll tell you why. So there is, of course, some degree of abstraction involved, but we want the game's currencies to be strongly rooted in the mechanics and not feel arbitrary, like in U4, where you have your ruler be the main source of the mana, which is a bit ridiculous. Because, yeah. So what about that? Enough about that, and into capacities. What exactly are they? So basically, yeah, it says that they're not a pooled resource and they're not accumulated or spent, but instead you have a constant generation and a constant usage. This is much like in Hearts of Iron 2, where money is basically constantly being generated and spent. But if you have no pool, obviously this is, yeah, it's basically, yeah, it's a capacity. It's like transport capacity in Hearts of Iron 2, or I suppose like a pop cap that you can go over and be penalized if you go over in a strategy game. And you would generally want to keep your usage from exceeding your generation. Each capacity represents one specific area of your nation's ability to govern and is used solely for matters relating to that area. And this is why I'm not against this. This is because in Victoria 2, the mechanic for that was administrative capacity. Or administrative efficiency. Now, administrative efficiency was kind of weird, kind of a weird mechanic with a bunch of strange interactions to technology and budget, and was very, very sort of opaque in the way it worked. So having this be a little bit more sort of solidified is good in general. And also, I believe some of these are going to replace diplomatic points, which were a really, really stupid mechanic. Because it was really, really difficult to... It was really, really difficult for diplomatic points to neither be superfluous or annoying. What do I mean by that? You always either had no or not enough diplomatic points for what you were wanting to do, or way too many, and, you know, the diplomatic points went into this sort of cap of a 9. So you were either not using them or using them too much, and therefore the mechanic just didn't work, and it felt annoying constantly, because you were either like, oh, what do I use them for? Or you were either like, oh no, I need them, but there weren't many ways to actually generate them. Anyway, yeah, basically there is an effect for each capacity, which is positive if generation exceeds usage, and negative if it exceeds generation. So basically, if you're trying to do too much with too little capacity, in other words, too few resources, you're going to be in trouble. Which, yeah, it's good. It's a good way to sort of deal with excessive blobbing. It's a good way to deal with excessive, like, alliance spam when it comes to the diplomatic the diplomatic points, and yeah, I like it. Basically, it's supposed to represent how the state is trying to constantly strengthen itself and trying to do more things, and sometimes it sort of oversteps its boundaries and ends up, yeah, overextending and sort of getting itself into trouble. So basically, a country that incorporates territories left, right, without expanding its bureaucratic core may find itself quickly mired in debt as tax collection collapses under the strain. So bureaucracy, the left-hand side one, is the ability to govern, invest, and collect taxes in incorporated territory. So basically, if you go way too over that, you're going to exceed basically you're overextending your empire. It is produced by the government administration's buildings where the nation's bureaucrats will be employed. So this is why I think this is interesting, because you're going to need both the pops and the buildings. Most likely, if you don't have enough buildings, you're not going to be able to employ the pops to generate the capacity. If you're going to have the pops but not the buildings, the pops are going to be unemployed, and therefore they're going to not generate the capacity and then also demote. If you have too many buildings, you're still not going to get you've basically wasted money, because the generation is primarily dependent on the pops themselves, much like, again, the industrial score in Victoria 2. You can have giant factories that are empty, and those aren't going to generate any industrial score. So yeah, all of the nation's incorporated states use a base amount of bureaucracy, and incorporated states are basically cores, instead of cores, I suppose they're more like the states where you create the state, so like non-colonial states. Yeah, further increased by each institution, such as education or police, that a country is invested in. So obviously, the more of an advanced state apparatus that you're running, the more bureaucracy it's going to take to actually run it. And yeah, understandable. Now, authority, the second one, is the head of state's personal power and ability to enact change in a country through decree. So that's basically kind of like political power in Hoi 4. It is generated from laws. Generally, the more repressive and authoritarian the country, the more authority it will generate. And it is used by a variety of actions, such as enacting decrees in specific states, interacting with interest groups, and promoting or banning a certain type of goods. Now, I'm not 100% sure that this is a good idea to balance it this way, with the more repressive and authoritarian the country, the more authority it will generate. I feel like it would make sense for democracies to generate, if anything, more authority than authoritarian countries if the current political sort of landscape enjoys a wide margin of support among the interest groups, which are the political parties of this game. I feel like this would make like more realistic sense when it comes to just like a political science background, but I guess from a gameplay standpoint, I understand that you want to like starkly differentiate autocracies from democracies and make sure that you can like easily balance them between one and the other. So okay, so you can see that right now this is like, I believe, Sweden. You get 100 from base value, 200 from oligarchy, which I think is a like a state law kind of thing. 200 from national supremacy, 100 from freedom of conscience, and a bunch of stuff. And then you also have ruler traits that can influence that one way or the other. And while the bureaucracy affected taxes, this affects enactment rate, which I believe is basically how fast institutions are upgraded, basically. Okay, sorry, I had to do a thing. Yeah, influence. The third one. Influence is basically the diplomacy points. It represents a country's ability to conduct diplomacy and its reach on the global stage. is generally primarily from your rank. So obviously great powers are going to have the most. And it's used to support ongoing diplomatic actions and pacts, such as improving relations, alliances, trade deals, subjects, and so on and so forth. Overall, the purpose of influence is to force players to make interesting choices about which foreign countries they want to build strong diplomatic relationships with. Now, I actually despise this somewhat. The reason why is that as I said, this replaces diplomatic points, which is great. It also, I think, replaces like actual influence. You know what I mean? The actual influence mechanic from Victoria 2. It's replaced by this this resource, which goes into diplomatic actions, and by the markets mechanic, which we're going to take a look at later. And this is, I think, a massive shame because I used to love the influence mechanic. Like, the idea to map paint without going to war is great. You're still going to be able to do that in Victoria 3, but I liked the influence mechanic because it was based on a wide variety of modifiers. So if a country was neighboring you, your influence points generation in that country was increased. Your base generation was dependent on your total score. So how much prestige, how much industry, how much military. And then you had other factors affecting it, such as, for example, the number of pops in the receiving country. If a country was very, very, very populous, it was difficult to influence. So this creates basically this creates an environment where the influence game is very organic. Depending on the global situation, you're going to have a drastically different sphere of influence, basically. And unfortunately, a lot of that complexity goes out the window with at least this part of the mechanic. Because influence is just, yeah, you're a minor power, you get a little bit. You're a secondary power, you get a little bit more. You're a great power, you get a lot. And it's used for diplomatic actions, which is good, as I said. So, number 3 is buildings. Buildings is pretty much just like in Victoria 2, except with, to be honest, a little bit more complexity. They've expanded the system out slightly. So basically, buildings are where pops work to produce goods. Buildings represent a wide range of industries, businesses, and government functions. And yeah, so states are where the buildings are built. It's the geographic unit and where pops live, and also where sort of the RGOs are being gathered. Yeah. So basically, when you build buildings, pops go in and they work in them, right? And they need qualified pops to work in them to yield any benefit. And an empty building is just that, empty and completely useless. This is basically like in Victoria 2, but it also is expanded to include buildings that in Victoria 2 didn't need pops, such as the railroads and the ports and the military bases and all that. So most buildings are directly constructed, but some, like the subsistence buildings, will appear automatically. So that's obviously supposed to represent sort of the lower tier end of scale. And I'm guessing this is also going to be how investment happens. Yeah. So we have subsistence buildings. These are obviously like what your subsistence farmers or subsistence fishermen or whatever use to get just sustenance if you cannot employ them in another capacity. Obviously, you've got your vast majority of the population at the beginning being employed in these kinds of enterprises, which aren't really enterprises. And another special building type is urban centers, which is basically supposed to represent urbanization. So obviously, the bigger urban center, like urban centers are tied to the urban population. And when the urban population increases, the urbanization increases, and then the urban center levels increase, which then give you basically give you some bonuses, like they employ shopkeepers, and I have no idea if they actually said if they give any other buffs, but whatever, maybe we'll see about that later. Now, next up is government buildings, which is obviously fully funded by the state, communism, and provide crucial civil services for the smooth running of the Victorian nation. That's the government administration, as I said, and the universities, where academics produce innovation for technological progression. So this is much like in Stellaris, where you're going to need the actual research labs for researchers to work and give you research. It's not like in Victoria 2, where intellectuals just give research. So that's quite nice, because obviously that adds a an upkeep sort of to that. Now, the counterpart to government buildings is private industries, which is obviously, you know, all the farms, plantations, mines, and factories. They're not owned by the states, but rather by pops, such as capitalists or aristocrats, unless you decide to expropriate them for the good of the people or something, I don't know. Who reap the profits they bring in and pay wages to the other pops working there, unless the Confederacy. Many of these buildings are limited by locally available resources, such as the arable land for agriculture, which is an interesting addition. I kind of like that, because it is going to create a sort of arable land pressure on certain countries, which I guess is like realistic somewhat. Or how much iron is available for the iron mines. However, factories are only limited by how many people you can cram into the state. So basically, you can build them up ad infinitum, but, you know, unless you have the people to actually go in and work them, you've got a problem. So yeah, there is no system of building slots, as we want limitations on buildings to function in a sensible and realistic way. Which I suppose is kind of good, because the, like, random arbitrary 8 factories limit in Victoria 2 is kind of weird, especially when you get to the late game, or if you're playing certain mods where you have a lot of goods. Having that limit is kind of troll, yes. So basically, you can see that for this thing over here, this state is sporting a size 1 urban center, where you have, I guess, chair making factories, I think, but I don't think those are artisans. That looks like a factory. You've got the income from that, I believe, and you've got your resource gathering operations, so your fisheries, your lumber mills, your iron mines, and it looks like you can upgrade that building 18 times for the fisheries, 12 times for the lumber yards, and 5 times for the iron mines. And you've got a bunch of arable land. Now, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to actually build farms, but if you are, I don't know, whatever. Iron looks like it's going to be really profitable, understandably. And finally, there are development buildings. These are often, but not always, government buildings that distinguish themselves by providing vital state-level functions. So it's basically infrastructure. Not sure why they're calling it development buildings when the word infrastructure exists, but shoots himself in the head. A couple examples are barracks that recruit and train soldiers from the local population, and railways that provide the infrastructure other buildings need to bring their goods to the market. So yeah, it looks like if you're not going to have enough railways or enough infrastructure in general, you might have a sort of profitability penalty to your factories and your farms, because the goods are not going to get to where they need to be, which is a pretty good mechanic, although it's basically the opposite of what they did in Victoria 2. In Victoria 2, if you build more infrastructure, it increases the throughput of your industrial buildings and your RGOs. So basically, the bonus in Victoria 2 was in the output, while in Victoria 3 you're going to have a malus to your output if you do not meet the requirements, which is basically the opposite. Instrumentally, it's the opposite. If it's the opposite thing with the same effect. Still good. Depends on how they implement it. So to finish up this Dev Diary, I want to mention that building up your country is meant to be more of a hands-on experience than Victoria 3, as this is absolutely core to the society building aspect of the game. So obviously, you can see that they have put more attention into it, which is nice to see, to be honest. Nice to see. So we have goods. Goods are probably, along with pops, like the most important part of the game, so they really, really need to get this right. Basically, it's what makes Victoria 3 really, really fun. It's the sort of securing the goods that are required to run your country. And sort of making sure that you're always moving up that value chain, at least if you're playing a somewhat advanced nation. And making sure that you're transforming those primary goods into manufactured goods, and those manufactured goods into higher level manufactured goods. You know, the sort of economics bullshit that you're all too familiar with. Now, the price varies both in the base and in actual market value, as the prices of goods change depending on supply and demand. This is rather good, because in Victoria 2, the price was, I believe, basically 100% dependent on supply and demand. It could, in theory, go all the way up to infinite, which is not really how prices work. Because, again, there is a sort of abstract value to goods in real-life economics. Now, finding out exactly what value, where value comes from, is like the entire point of economics. So don't take my word for it. Although, you know, since like basically classical economics, classical liberal economics, and Marxist economics, which is basically what this game is, you know, should be kind of based on, because it appears to be that those types of economics are generally sufficient to explain modern capitalism, and that modern capitalism was being born in the time period of Victoria 2. Basically, they posit something called the labor theory of value, basically meaning that value comes from the work that is put in the abstract social amount of work that is put to produce a certain type of good. So obviously, this explains why if a type of product is being manufactured in a certain way, if a new type of, you know, a new type of manufacturing technique comes along, then the prices are going to fall regardless of whether or not there is more or less supply and demand in the market, because you simply need less labor to produce it. That's the general gist of it when it comes to at least the technological aspect of prices. I'm not sure what approach they're going to actually take to calculate value and prices, because again, value and prices are not exactly the same thing, and it kind of seems like this quote-unquote base price is going to be is going to not be the same thing as the price that pops are actually paying to buy goods. And this base price is basically value. So, I don't know. We'll see. Now, there are 4 broad categories of goods. You have your staple goods, which I suppose is like subsistence goods, luxury goods, industrial goods, and military goods. Now, obviously, military goods are going to be consumed by your military. Industrial is going to be consumed by industry. Luxury is going to be consumed by pops if they have enough wealth. And staple goods is going to be what pops are going to be looking to consume on a sort of regular basis. And if they don't, well, guillotine. So of these, the staple and luxury goods are consumed by pops. Well, yeah, we've seen it. You will find buildings using luxury goods and pops purchasing industrial goods when and where it makes sense for them to do so, which is good. You don't want this to be too sort of 100% rigid. Now, I wonder what these goods are. Looks like there's paper. I wish I could actually... Yeah, it looks like we have paper, lumber, or timber. What is the difference between those two things? I have no idea. Wood, in general. It doesn't actually appear to be worked wood, so it's wood. Fish. Bells. Wonder what that is. Coal. Meat. Paper? So I guess that's not paper. This looks... Or maybe these are... Maybe this is lumber. Maybe these are planks. Cloves. Maybe luxury cloves, maybe irregular cloves. I have no idea. Opium, looks like. Everybody loves it. Fruit. Construction tools. And sort of food stuffs. Now, it also appears like it's going to be color-coded. So it looks like these are staple goods. These are industrial goods. These are luxury goods. And I don't think any of these are military goods. So the interface looks pretty good. Like, the higher the price, the more sort of coins and, you know, the gold color you have. If you have less coins and it looks like a silver color, it means the price is lower. Looks like you have basically a supply and demand mechanic, and there you can see sort of the surpluses and the deficits in the supply compared to the demand. So yeah, that's understandable. So staple goods are everyday goods that pops need to live, such as food to eat, wood to heat their homes, and clothes to wear. That's understandable. Living without clothes or food is kind of difficult. So they tend to be purchased in vast quantities by poor and middle-class pops, while richer pops generally eschewing them for their luxury variants. Understandable. And you have, as you can see, some grain in the British market. So this is actually something that's amazing to me. Because it was one of the big downsides of the Victoria II economic system. It looks like you're going to have a price for every single market. So grain is not going to cost the same worldwide. It's going to cost probably more in Arabia than in China or whatever, right? Which makes sense because, yeah. So you're going to have a localized pricing, which is something that I was bringing up when Victoria Free was announced, which basically saying, yeah, wouldn't it be great if in an even less globalized economy than our modern economy, which still has different prices of goods in different areas of the globe, wouldn't it be great if prices were differentiated? And it looks like this is the case, which is quite nice. I wonder if... Yeah, I wonder if wages are going to come into the sort of pricing calculation. Probably not. It would be like the next big step, because obviously in real life, sometimes industries are just more competitive than others because of, you know, it's called what's called a labor-intensive enterprise, because basically you can cut down on the labor costs. Now, this is not like an end-all be-all, like a lot of protectionist economists today are basically claiming, like, oh no, we shipped too many jobs to low-income countries, and now, you know, they can flood our markets and dump with cheap, ultra-cheap prices, because again, prices aren't just dependent on labor cost, they aren't just dependent on supply and demand. It's kind of a complex thing. and reducing labor cost isn't just going to make your industries competitive, but it's a pretty important thing, uh, especially when you're looking at like the late game in a Victoria type of game. It would be interesting to have the simulation of like the countries that have already industrialized and where the pops are sort of already getting a little bit richer on average, um, facing off against countries that are only now developing. Therefore, the labor cost is cheaper. I don't know. It would be interesting to see, but maybe that's just a little bit too much, and that technology just isn't there. Like maybe you just need way too powerful computers to actually simulate that on something like a Victoria free scale. So I don't know. Anyway, you can see that basically down here you have a nice little way to make it to integrate map modes into the little goods UI. So show the potentials on the map, show the production on the map, show the consumption on the map. So basically where it is being consumed, where it is being produced, and I'm guessing the potential is basically where you can increase the production of this type of good, and it is sold by X and bought by X. So I'm guessing it tells you yes, the British market is consuming 8.84 thousand when it comes to the pops and 900 when it comes to the buildings, and it's produced from buildings. Now I wonder if later down the line this is also going to be the way you can see whether or not these goods are being imported or not. Yes. So luxury goods are things that pops do not necessarily need but want, such as fine foods, luxury drinks like tea or coffee, or fine clothes made from Chinese silk, much like in Victoria too. Luxuries tend to be more profitable to produce than staple goods, but depend on having a customer base of money. So yeah, that's basically the sort of consumption economy that's supposed to develop over time in your country. And yeah, here we have a porcelain. I love how it still tells you what buildings produce one type of good or another, although I want to kill myself because Victoria Free Paradox Interactive team thinks that porcelain is produced by Glassworks. I feel like these Swedish barbarians need to be shown what porcelain is, but whatever. Interesting how it doesn't say that artisans can produce porcelain, because how are you going to explain Chinese fucking, I don't know. I'm killing myself. It's late in the day and I want to shoot myself. Glassworks bone china, Glassworks ceramics. So these are production methods which we're going to take a look at later. It's basically upgrades to factories and buildings and farms that allow diversification of the economy and a sort of tall growth of what you're doing. Consumed by pops of wealth levels 15 to 99 as part of the luxury items needs category. So that gives you a nice little breakdown of what's supposed to be going on in the in-game economy with that item. Now, iron, coal, rubber, and lead are, of course, industrial goods whose main purpose is to be converted into other more profitable goods. Securing a steady supply of industrial goods is crucial to industrialization, of course. So tools, tells you the sell orders and the buy orders. Military goods, obviously, armies are going to grow and they're going to eat up a gigantic amount of goods. And so that's going to be pretty epic. And next up we have the production methods, which is what was hinted at in the previous screenshots. Now, basically, these are kinds of building upgrades, but they're not just straight upgrades. They're supposed to sort of deeply affect how your industries operate. Why? We'll see. So improving industrial processes over time is to be expected, but in some cases those improvements might require goods as input that the country has scant access to. So this is why, for example, coming up like really, really quickly with a real life example of this is kind of trolling. It's kind of why Belarus is like geopolitically dependent on, or not just geopolitically, but also economically dependent on Russia, because the Belarusians have a strong Belarus export goods, have a strong refined petroleum industry. Basically, they have a big old refinery industry. But you might be asking yourself, hey, does Belarus not have oil, or am I missing something? Well, yeah, you're right, because if you look at their imports, they import a bunch of crude petroleum. Basically, because of complex geopolitical reasons, they decided to build their economy around Russia. Russia has a lot of petroleum, and they export that petroleum in some cases at like subsidized prices to Belarus. And Belarus can then build a sort of highly efficient, in terms of just, profitability, a highly profitable petroleum industry while not having any petroleum. This, of course, means that Belarus is dependent on Russia, because if they didn't have that type of industry, they wouldn't have this problem. So this is why later down the line, you're going to need to be expanding your influence out to sort of secure the goods that are required by your market, which are going to be ever more, essentially. And hopefully, if they balance out the mechanic correctly, and if they implement it correctly, it's going to feel even more sort of interactive and rewarding and complex than the Victoria 2 equivalent. Now, Victoria 2 already had this mechanic of like trying to secure access to the resources that your industry needs, but it was more it was kind of easier to manage because there wasn't as much interplay, I suppose, between different industries. One type of industry was always going to require the same types of goods. It wasn't going to change throughout the game. Yeah, well, others permit the output of a new type of end product at the expense of the old one. As a result, buildings in Victoria 3 require more flexible upgrade paths than what is afforded by permanent linear no-brainer improvements. So, usually between 2 and 5 production methods per building type. Only one is active at any given time in each category. And I wonder if you're going to have the choice to actually switch between them in the game, and whether or not that's going to cost money, efficiency, or whether you're going to need to rebuild the buildings, who knows. So most categories fall into one of these types. Base, so this governs the general tech level and efficiency of the buildings, produces goods typical of the building type. Refining reduces the outputs of typical goods in favor of a type of specialized or luxury good, sometimes adding a special input, which is interesting. I'm trying to think of a similar example. Really reminds me of Tropico, which is going to come out of left field. But if you've played the Tropical games, it's basically a city simulator where you're playing the dictator of a Caribbean country. It's a very, very arcade game, but basically in that game, you build buildings, right? Goods come into them, they get worked, goods pop out. And in that game, you have upgrades where sometimes it's going to have a downside, like higher upkeep cost and lower output of that resource, but it's going to add an extra effect, like it produces another type of resource at a specified rate, or it produces, dark money because it's an interesting game. And automation adds industrial goods as input to reduce the building's unskilled workforce requirement. All hail the robots. Ownership determines who owns the means of production in the buildings, typically governed by laws. So you're going to be seeing the sort of evolution of shares and stocks, and stock exchanges, and limited stock companies, or maybe public stock companies, whatever. You know what the fuck I'm talking about. With the right technologies, the food industries can make groceries from both grain and fish. So you're going to either have bakeries or canneries. They can also refine grain and sugar into liquor. Speaking of which, wouldn't it be great if I had some liquor, but it's too late. With advanced technologies, food industries can be partially automated, drastically reducing the need for unskilled labor. Simple food industries are operated by merchants guilds, shopkeepers. Okay, so you're not going to have capitalists for simple food industries. You're going to have the petty bourgeois, the artisans, the shopkeepers, while more advanced and profitable food industries are owned by capitalists who reinvest some of their dividends. So basically the difference between, like, I don't know, the modern American or Canadian food industry and, your like farmer's market or whatever, or Italy. So you can see down here your production methods. I'm not sure what this UI is meant to tell me, but yeah, you've got your different types of things. As one example, an iron mine's base production method determines if miners use only... Oh, I see what's going on. So this is like 2 buildings, I think, right? Because you can see that there's like 2-level building. So like 2 of these are bakeries. 2 of these are canned food factories. And 2 of these have some kind of upgrade. Question mark, I don't know, maybe, who knows, I think. Anyway, an iron mine's base production methods determines if miners only use picks and shovels or if they also need some kind of engine-driven pumping mechanisms, poggers. There are several different pumping technologies which also determine what fuel is used. So basically, one type of production method may be unlocked at the beginning of the game, like, mechanized mining. But the efficiency of mechanized mining is going to go up as the game progresses because of technology, which is good because this means that the technologies and the inventions, I'm not sure if inventions are going to be around, can be balanced out in a more surgical manner than in Victoria 2. In Victoria 2, you need it to be like, hey, I'm going to improve just resource gathering operation output, or just gathering operation output for a single type of resource like iron or coal or whatever. In here, it's actually a little bit more insane because there is no reason why you should research mining equipment if you're not going to be upgrading your mines with the production method. So it's very, very surgical. It's going to have a lot of min-maxing purposes, and I like it. So the more advanced the pumping mechanism, the more deposits can be accessed, and the faster the iron can be mined, but more coal and oil is used in the process. And I'm guessing this also means that maybe if there's like a deposit amount for certain types of resources, then obviously having a higher production method is going to deplete those deposits faster. Maybe, who knows? This creates more demand for qualified workers and also opens up a number of better paid positions for those pops who made the qualification, thus increasing, I'm going to say, a Marxism. It basically increases what Marx called the organic composition of capital, which is basically how much capital is required for the same amount of profit. Basically, if you're having to invest more capital into machines, that means that this composition of capital is going to increase. These are what are called capital-intensive industries. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would you want that? Well, that is because this raises the overall level of the economy, because if you need more investment to generate the same amount of profit, that is going to stimulate investment, which is in turn going to increase real wages, which is going to increase general prosperity and general growth. This is basically the whole reason why generally countries where salaries are higher, generally they tend to do better economically, while countries where maybe you have a high growth, but you don't see a corresponding wage increase below the sort of low to middle income level, they're these kinds of economies are very, very vulnerable to just catastrophic crashes, because often what that growth means is that this is growth that is going to sort of basically only benefit a very, very small portion of the population, and it's not really being reinvested into the economy as much. It creates basically patrimonialism. This is what happened with a lot of Latin American economies. Periodically, you have commodities booms, where basically one type of commodity that is produced in one country or the other is going to, for one reason or another, be very, very valuable. So obviously that raises the general growth. But if you don't diversify the economy, and if especially the general sort of wage level doesn't increase below what economists call the middle income trap, then at the first sort of global recession, or even like local crises because of either political or economic reasons, all of that is going to explode. You saw that with Brazil a lot of times, basically throughout the 20th century, and even in the early 21st, with the recession that Brazil had after the sort of lowering of the oil prices, combined with the political crisis in the country. So yeah, this generally seems to be rather realistic. Again, it depends on how it is implemented. Now, the revolution in chemical science of the era allowed the use of explosives in mining, which is a secondary production method only used in mines. Once nitroglycerin is invented, Alfred Nobel, it can be used in mines to generate even more minerals at the expense of explosives produced by the chemical industry, and also with a higher rate of workplace accident. Boom, boom. Once invented, portable steam donkey engines can be deployed at mining sites to drastically reduce the amount of manual labor required just for hauling. This costs the building some money in the form of coal and engines, but reduces the amount of money they have to pay in wages. Perhaps more importantly, it frees up those laborers to do other work in other buildings if the state is running roll on workers. I wonder if that's going to cause like ludism, which is the phenomenon of sort of the super early sort of workers movement, where people were basically blaming machines because they were stealing their jobs. Oh, wait. I wonder if that reminds you of anything. Anyway, and basically they were blaming the machines and smashing them up because they were like, if the machines aren't here, then you're going to need to employ back my cousin, right? Which, on a sort of very linear logic, makes sense. Of course, that's not exactly how the economy works, and so they got fucked. Yeah. In most countries, simple mines are owned and operated by the merchants guild at the game start. These are small-time purveyors of the goods represented by the shopkeepers. But once mines start to industrialize, the capitalists step in to take ownership. In most cases, these capitalists, which basically I suppose is like their way of representing capital accumulation from small owners to big owners. In most cases, these capitalists will come from shopkeepers promoted to these newly created positions, but some might come from other pops in the state, even other capitalists in buildings not quite as lucrative as these new mines. There are fewer capitalists than shopkeepers, but they draw a higher wage, and more importantly, they reinvest some of their earnings into the country's expanding industry, depending on how much profit their workplace is generating for them. So basically, you want capitalists because it's a capitalism simulator. As new ideas spread across your society, you might be able to make the mining industry publicly traded instead of privately held, and later on perhaps even nationalize it to be run by government bureaucrats or turned into cooperatives where the profit is shared between the workers. So this is the ownership of the means of production. So yeah, production methods aren't limited to consuming and producing goods. Government administrations employ bureaucrats and clerks who use paper to produce bureaucracy, which is a capacity. So basically, the production methods can affect bureaucracy. They can affect transportation and infrastructure because of, obviously railways. Universities employ academics to let the state guide research and development of new technologies and ideas. Ben Shapiro, okay. Okay, Ben Shabibo. Virtually any kind of currency modifier or effect can be produced by production methods and buildings and can be applied in a variety of ways to the country, state, or even the building itself. So a basic government administration building consumes a certain amount of paper and produces a certain amount of bureaucracy, but each additional level beyond to the first adds a 2% throughput bonus due to the economy of scale. Okay. Alrighty then. So, this of course adds a tremendous amount of capacity for modding in new buildings and production methods. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, modding. It's good. Let's hope that they make it good, unlike, yeah. If tweaking multiple production methods across several categories in every single building in the game sounds a bit complex to compare to linear upgrades, that's right. That's because it's a good idea to make it complex. Now you have a buildings panel to, I suppose, like, check out on a sort of ledger what your states are looking like in terms of the industry they have in them, what your overall industry of one type looks like you're in your entire country. Yeah, this does make sense. And what kinds of production methods are being used in a single one or the other. So as you can see, for example, down here in the screenshot, you have the buildings in the United States of America. Freedom and democracy. So you can see that the textile mills that they've opened in Louisiana, that's not a Louisiana accent, they're using one type of production method. And the ones in Massachusetts, that's Boston, they're using another one. And in South Carolina, and the good old state of South Carolina, they're using another one. And you can see that this results in different income levels, possibly also depending on the pops that are in them. To minimize the requirement for mental math, we've also created prediction tools that give you a breakdown of what to expect from choosing a certain type of production method. Okay. Yeah, basically just, you know, are you going to destroy your society by doing something? So this is predictive tooltips. As you can see, for example, if you're prioritizing another type of luxury, or if you're switching around the production methods, change luxury production method to craftsman sewing. So just get the first upgrade. It's telling you, hey, you don't have enough qualified workforce to fully staff the building, but it's going to increase the balance. It's going to produce less normal clothes and more luxury clothes. It's going to consume more silk. It's going to employ more shopkeepers, and it's going to employ less laborers. So that basically tells you a general overview of what's going to happen once you destroy your entire society. I've recorded this for an hour. Okay, it appears like I've done from number 1 to number 5. Okay, since I don't want to record for another entire hour, I think I'm gonna end it right here. So yeah, this was the first 5 Dev Diaries. Stay tuned for the next 5 Dev Diaries. And then I'm gonna again wait, I guess at this point, 5 diaries equals 1 hour roughly, which makes sense for a video length of something like this. So yeah, so far the format I'm gonna adopt is every 5 Dev Diaries. I'm gonna go over them, talk about in sort of a very general sense, as you can see, what I think in terms of both gameplay and the sort of simulation terms this is going to mean for Victoria Free. And yeah, as I said, I don't really have like access to the beta of the game, so all I know is what is being shown in these screenshots and these Dev Diaries, so I can try to provide a little bit of analysis based on that and try to get a bit of speculation. and just kind of talk about what I think that's going to mean for the game. So if you like that, good. If not, can't do anything else for you, champ. So yeah, I'm going to thank y'all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you soon. Have a good day.